Well, I am delighted to welcome Detective Superintendent Fil Capaldi back to the Scotland Against Modern Slavery podcast. He's the head of the human trafficking team at Police Scotland. We've spoken and met a number of times, and I was lucky enough to meet Phil face to face earlier on this year, which we'll talk about shortly. But Phil's come back, and if you remember, he was talking to us last year about the situation in Scotland, about some of the criminality behind it, about his role, what it involves in Police Scotland, what they've been doing. So I thought it'd be a great idea to get a check-in with Phil. Let's get a bit more information about where we are, what's been happening, and let's just get a bit of a chat. So, Phil, thank you very much for coming back.
Thanks, Shan. Yeah, absolutely. Delighted. Absolute pleasure.
So, Phil, I suppose we met face-to-face again for the first time after last few years of working together at an event in the City Chambers in Glasgow. That event really significant for me because there was so many things that I didn't know about, that I learned about. Even the harrowing story that the young girl talked about, her journey through from Poland, of all I can say is huge trauma in her family, coming to the UK, being exploited for labour, falling into a trap of sexual exploitation, drug addiction, sexual exploitation, labour exploitation. And now she's at the other end of this journey, and she was only early 20s, if I remember, Phil. It was moving, really moving. She stood up in front of us, sorry, but that was really hit me hard because it was a real life story. It wasn't just people like us talking about it. This is somebody that we met, and this Phil does this for a living. So, just to go back to that event, Phil, what was the background to that? Because it was a Police Scotland event, and it was really, really informing. But what was the grounding for it? Why did you hold it, and what was it about?
Yeah, I think it's really important that there's a recognition that for law enforcement to tackle human trafficking effectively, to be effective in trying to infiltrate some of these crime groups and disrupt them, that there's a recognition that this isn't just a Police Scotland problem. It's not a UK policing problem. It's Europe-wide, and it goes beyond the European borders as well. So it was really important that we got key international partners around the table. I think we were really lucky to get the police attaché from the Romanian embassy, Andrea. She's a real advocate of what we're doing here, and a real advocate of that kind of joined up working to share information and intelligence, and colleagues from Homeland Security investigations based at the US Embassy. We have a lot of direct contact with Homeland Security investigations based on the kind of work that we do on a daily basis here. So it's not just about being inward looking as to what's happening on the ground here, but how that extends across the UK and further afield. Predominantly Eastern Europeans are the kind of individuals, both in terms of trafficking victims and organised crime groups that we come across routinely. But beyond that as well, there's a much, much bigger picture. I think what was really important as well, and you're right, the harrowing story that we heard from the young lady from Poland, unfortunately, it's not an uncommon story. It's not the kind of story that we haven't heard before, and it's fairly typical of the way that crime groups prey upon people's vulnerabilities. But it's really important that we have an anchor with support services who are based in these countries. So the likes of Romania, we've got our victim navigators from Justice and Care based with our team. They're dedicated and based with our team, and they support victims of trafficking through the criminal justice process. But it's really important because they have a direct link in with their own people with Justice and Care in Romania, so that we have a victim who is repatriated back to Romania. We've got a support agency there to provide that support, that ongoing support to them on the ground. But I think the international aspect of what we do is really important and can't really be overstated. I think most recently we've been in Budapest. We have a joint inquiry with the Hungarian Human Trafficking Unit and another police force in the UK. I can't go into too much detail because it's live. But that face-to-face contact, that sharing of information and intelligence to build an evidential case is just, it can't be overstated.
So this is the importance of building building that case of, making sure there's, doing your best to make sure there's prosecutions that take place then, of anything that anything you're uncovering. And so I suppose probably a good point then to ask about, there's a lot of understanding what you've said, there's a lot of cross-national interaction going on. You're quite really involved, and being at that event, I saw it. There was Homeland Security from America, as you mentioned. The Romanian police were involved. We at SAMS were working with the Victim Navigator Unit as well, with regards to any victims that are needing support into work, and that's been, I would say, the success of that's been really good to hear, and they're getting the support as well, which is brilliant. Can I ask then about where are we going with what you're seeing here with regards to prosecutions and cases then in the last 12 months or so? What are you seeing? What's the types of things that you're seeing and you've been involved with in the police?
Yeah. I think probably first and foremost, the pandemic has really held things up right across the board in the criminal justice system. And without speaking for the courts, you can speak for themselves, that there's a significant backlog of cases as a result of the pandemic and the way things shut down. But most recently, the two very noticeable successes of late Operation Altercation, I think, had a bit of media coverage. It was a case based in Greater Glasgow, and it involved human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation, predominantly Chinese women being exploited for that purpose and forced into prostitution. So there was a number of convictions for that particular case, 4 in total, and the 4 individuals involved. I think the total sentencing for the 4 was about 31 years in total, so significant sentences. But I think it was the judges summing up when he talked about the lack of humanity and the complete disregard for the well-being and the feelings of the individuals involved and what they were being exposed to on a daily basis. And it was quite a horrendous case. And again, the irony of a case like that, it was 2 years in the making, really, to put it all together, was that it started off with a single phone call from a member of the public. Somebody phoned in about possible brothel being operated or men coming and going at different hours in a particular flat. And that was that one small piece of information that started the ball rolling for us. And we built up the intelligence case around that. Now, it's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of time, effort, and dedication from the teams involved. But it wasn't just ourselves that were involved in that one. We had a significant support from Home Office Crime and Financial Investigation, who really did support that investigation along with ourselves, although we had the lead on it. But I always say, Shan, it doesn't matter where we prosecute these people, it doesn't matter who takes the lead on it, as long as we take people out of that situation, rescue them from that situation, and people stand accountable for what they've done. In addition, we've had another conviction, a long-running case, Operation Feature, that involved exploitation on fishing boats in and around the coast of Scotland and elsewhere in the UK. And whilst the trafficking charge never went through, because of various complexities around the case, there were significant health and safety breaches, where the owners of the vessels were fined thousands of pounds as a result of their practices. So that was significant for us because it allowed us to disrupt the activities of that particular group and the kind of practices that they were adopting in relation to migrant fishermen, which were pretty horrendous, without putting too fine a point on it. So, 2 notable convictions that we've had at court. There are still a large number of cases in the pipeline, some of which have been reported to the Crown for consideration of prosecution, but some that are still live and active inquiries with my own team based here and with teams throughout Scotland.
So even when I've just come back to the fishery issue, because I've heard, some of the other charities that are involved in the anti-human trafficking movement, I suppose, in Scotland, that there's always this concern about the fishing industry, and what we are looking to do as we move SAMs into the next year in 2023 is that we're looking to have business sectors that we are specialising in. For example, there's 56 businesses now that are corporate partners of SAM since we started, just under 2 years ago, which is really significant. And now I think what we're hoping to do is sectorise those businesses, and the roundtables will then move into, and the topics will move into sector-specific meetings, if that makes sense. And I think the fisheries industry has been something that's been raised a number of times. Now, I understand that, given maybe some of the sensitivities around the case, but when you talk about the conditions of those individuals, those migrant workers that were uncovered, are you able to describe that at all in a bit of detail, Phil?
I think in general terms, without going into specific details, but in general terms, when exploitation is happening out with plain sight, I suppose, where that exploitation is taking place perhaps offshore, where there's no one else really around to see that or to report on it, and where people are working extended hours or not being trained properly, working in high-risk jobs, being exposed to risk that they shouldn't be being exposed to, and not really having a proper understanding of what the requirements of their employer might be, then it's really easy to see how bringing people from Southeast Asia to the UK and wider into Europe, into the fishing industry, you can see where there are certain vulnerabilities there around being away from home, being away from a support network, not understanding the legal system, not understanding what your rights are, I suppose. So that combination almost makes it a perfect storm, obviously, for being exploited. And I think that a lot of the groups that talked about the charities and the kind of third sector organisations, the support agencies, following some of the interactions we've had with them around labour exploitation in the fishing industry, are much more tuned in to what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve, and know who to come and speak to now, because we've had that extensive contact with them. So I think it's really important that there's a focus on it, because if somebody's been exploited in a building site or in a nail bar or in a hotel, other people are likely to pick up on that. If it's happening when no one else can see it, that's part of the problem. So if people are aware of their rights, if people are aware that we have a focus on what's going on, not only onshore but offshore, then perhaps that's enough to deter and hopefully disrupt less ethical operators from engaging in those practices.
And just thanks, Phil. There's something else that you'd mentioned there about the investigation or the operation you talked about with regards to those Chinese nationals and sexual exploitation, and you talked about the financial side of things. There was an investigation with the Home Office, is that right? And because I see that there's some of the people I speak to, particularly from some of the banking institutions, they've had involvement in various investigations nationally, I mean, UK-wide, and this sounds like probably a good example. What was the role then with regards to the financial side of things? Broadly speaking, what did their investigations throw up? What were they looking for, and what did they find?
Well, I think the reality is that groups and individuals don't engage in this kind of activity unless there's something in it for them. So there's sizable sums of money to be made. There always is. And that's why they become involved, and that's why they look to exploit. So it's about the movement and laundering of that money, how that money is moved out of the UK, whether it's through the banking system or by other means, without going into the detail of that, and tracking the progress and the movement of that money. Now that's problematic when it's predominantly cash transactions, but there are limitations on the amount of money you can take out of the UK and moving money. And it's about following those individuals and looking at their banking patterns, their financial patterns, and seeing how that links in elsewhere. And again, without giving away our trade secrets on how we do certain things, it's a really important part of every trafficking investigation, because we take it as read from the outset that it's about the money. So built into every single investigation is a financial aspect where we have a dedicated financial investigator looking at the individuals involved and looking at the movement of money. That's kind of starting point. So it's a really important aspect. I think, again, from a Home Office perspective, the Home Office crime and financial investigation team have law enforcement powers as we do, and they will be able to tell us when people are coming into the country, their movement around the UK, and particularly any immigration offences that may have been committed in respect of some of the members of the group who are involved. And that's a really important aspect for us as well, because it will show patterns of movement in and out of the UK. It will show what destinations they're flying to, they're moving onwards to, and that will give us another link into other law enforcement. So if we know somebody is going to be in Germany, we'll speak to the Bundespolice in Germany. If we know they're going to be in France, we'll speak to the gendarmerie. If we know they're going to be in Italy, we'll speak to the Caribbean area, etc., etc. So it takes us somewhere else, and it might very well be that one of those nations have an interest as well, or have an interest in the movement of money or financial inquiries, or they have featured as part of one of their investigations. And it almost links back to the importance of speaking to other law enforcement agencies beyond their own borders, because the human trafficking, modern slavery is a transnational crime. It cuts right across borders. Traffickers don't think about it that way. It's just another hurdle for them to go to the most lucrative markets to make the most money. So, it's a simple business model, simple economics of going to the most lucrative market to maximise the amount of money they're going to make, and then, try and launder that money and clean it up for themselves.
Interesting. It's like I suppose it's spoken about it before, and it's what drives labour exploitation, be that, is it serious organised crime, is it individuals, is it a family member, international or intercultural exploitation. Yeah. At the core of it is the making of money, isn't it? And that's, you can't dress up any other way.
Yeah, it's pretty simplistic. I mean, I've said it a million times over, Shan. It's a pretty simplistic business model. It's about, maximising the amount of money from one individual and then scaling that up. So if you have one woman being sexually exploited in a brothel, you can make £2,000 a week. If you multiply that by 10, you can make £20,000 a week. If you multiply that by 100, you can make £200,000 a week. You take your overheads off that. That's what your profit is. That's what you're left with. So the ability of groups to move around from place to place, to relocate to different cities right across the UK. And if you think about it, a lot of the crime groups we come across think nothing of jumping in the car and driving from London to Glasgow and having a 1 hour meeting. And we've come across this, having a 1 hour meeting, get back in the car and driving to London again, because they operate around mainland Europe where there are in effect no borders, and they can move country to country, and will drive from Germany to Romania or from Hungary to Belgium to conduct a business. So it's almost a European-wide network. The very fact that we're an island nation makes absolutely no difference to the way they operate. It's just a more problematic corner of the market, if you like, getting across the sea.
It's what drives it, isn't it? And that's what's behind it. And so we're going into this, and we're looking at the last quarter of 2022. I think the estimation of the national referral mechanism is that this will be the highest year since records began for victims that were rescued in Scotland. Yeah. Do you see this pattern? Do you think there's something driving this? Are we more aware? is it happening more? Is it amalgamation? What's the issues here?
Well, a combination of all of that. We are now kind of midway through December, and we've already surpassed our figures for 2019, which was our highest year since we started to formally record the NRM on establishment of Police Scotland. So as of this morning, we're over 610 victims have been recorded in the national referral mechanism in Scotland. About half of them report exploitation out with the UK, and about half within the UK. So people who have come to the UK report being exploited on the route here, and the other half report being exploited whilst they're in the UK. The highest proportion of exploitation type is around labour exploitation. Thereafter, forced criminality, so being forced to work in cannabis cultivation, forced begging, county lines. Again, there are a phenomenon really more widely seen in England and Wales, albeit we don't export county lines, so Scottish drug dealers do not go south of the border to sell heroin. But we import county lines, so drug dealers from Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, London, and usually the larger cities will send, predominantly will send vulnerable children, those under the age of 18, to come to Scotland, the more rural areas in Scotland, to deal drugs on their behalf. So county line refers to a telephone number, a phone line, as opposed to anything else. And again, the number of county lines cases we're picking up this year is 50% higher than last year. That's probably down to a method of better recording what we see, because they are being trafficked for the purposes of criminal or being engaged in criminality. So they're being moved around and relocated to do that work. And then the lesser number in terms of sexual is, in terms of exploitation types, is around sexual exploitation. And that's not to say that number is really low, and it's realistically low, it's artificially low, because we know full well from the investigations that we've had that there are a number of women involved in sexual exploitation who do not identify themselves as being trafficked. They will not enter the national referral mechanism as a potential victim of trafficking, and they will opt out of that. So whilst we can see it, quite plainly that they're being exploited, they won't identify as such. So the number of women engaging in being sexually exploited is artificially low. We know it's much higher than that. So in terms of nationalities, again, the bulk of the nationalities we're seeing are Vietnamese, which has been our highest nationality for a number of years now, who are being exploited. Albanians are probably the second highest nationality, and they've increased significantly. Again, down to vulnerabilities where they come to the UK without family or support networks, and thereafter are recruited by organised crime gangs and put to work predominantly in cannabis cultivations. And at number 3, it's UK nationals. So UK nationals being moved around within the UK for the purposes of some sort of exploitation type. So that's kind of top 3 nationalities, but it's relentless. It's relentless for my team. It's relentless across Scotland. And I think the more we look, particularly since the end of the pandemic, the more we see, and really getting that message across now about people recognising the signs or reporting the signs. Start it off. We'll look at the information. If you don't want to speak to us, go to the Modern Slavery Helpline, give the information to them, they will pass it to us, and then we can develop it from there. And it's usually, as I've said at the start, it's usually the smallest piece of information that brings the biggest reward, where we get a gut feeling the minute you read something and think, like the sound of that, let's take a closer look, let's start looking at the individuals involved, and before you know it, it's the genesis of a case against either a named individual or a group. So, yeah, there's no let up. It's a growth industry. It's not going away. Second biggest clandestine industry across the globe after drug dealing, because there's money. There's money to be made, and really changes in the UK's relationship with the EU haven't really made any difference to us in terms of the numbers. If anything, the numbers are going up, but the numbers are always going up.
Phil, that's quite a sobering way to finish the podcast. And I think, no, but it's honest and it's brutal, and I think, yeah, we have to accept as a society this is here to stay, but we can do as individuals, as businesses, groupings, do more. But I think the first thing is to accept that we have a problem, and I think that's a journey that I've seen over the last few years, that people actually start to go, oh, right, it does actually now happen here in Scotland, whereas before it didn't happen here, or people that perceived it didn't happen here.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it has been a bit of a long road for us to try and get that message across and to try and encourage people. And I think, based on the number of reports we're getting from members of the public, that message is getting through loud and clear, Shan. But it's the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. Well, Detective Superintendent Fil Capaldi, Police Scotland, you're heading up the National Human Trafficking Unit there. Keep up the good work, and please keep us posted on the work that's going on out there. I'm sure we'll keep you involved, and we'll keep close to this group. And at SAMS, thank you so much.
Thanks, Shan. Pleasure.